Hey, everybody, we're so excited. We're back with Life on Purpose Live. We have Billy Hallowell with us. I have been reading his articles and watching his videos for such a long time. He has been writing, writing books, doing speeches. I mean, he's involved in current events. I mean, I jumped on and prayed with him on Pure Talk, Pure Flix this morning, praying for Afghanistan. He's a man who is understanding a lot of what's going on in our culture. We're so excited to have you today, Billy. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, you have a very interesting journey and you've done so many exciting things. So we're just going to kind of talk through how God has just used the things in your life to thread together his purposes for you. But I think it's interesting that at 15, God called you at 15 to become a journalist. Talk a little bit about what happened after the Columbine event that really changed the course of your life.
Yeah, and thank you so much for asking about it because it's something I don't get to often talk about,
Hmm.
and I think it's because people we're so in the here and now we kind of don't go back to the beginning of people's stories. But I will tell you that since I can remember, I wanted to be a journalist. It was something that I just loved. I loved media and writing, but I was petrified to speak in front of people. I was very scared to do that, but yet when I was 15, I just felt now that I'm older, I recognize I was being called. At the time, I thought, oh, wow, this is really cool. I want to get involved and change the world, for the better. So the Columbine shooting happened, and I just remember being home. I was homesick from school that day. I was a freshman in high school, and I'll never forget. I'm watching it unfold on the TV, and I was just so horrified thinking, this could happen at my school, just
Right.
as a young person, as a 15-year-old thinking that. And so after the event, I got involved and created a website called Teen Web Online.
Hmm.
And that website was around for years. It's no longer around, but it was a resource where me as a teenager at the time was trying to inspire other young people in my generation to, love one another, be kind to one another, not to use violence, not to discriminate. And I grew up in a Christian home, and so these were natural elements of how I was brought up, right? Not doing those things. And so that starting point, though, little did I know at the time of doing these little media projects and starting to speak and kind of go out there and talk about these issues was going to be really the starting point of, I'm 30, I'm 37 now. And so I've been doing this since I was 15. It's kind of crazy.
That is crazy. Well, so how did that rock your faith world when you're looking at something like that happening and you're wanting to influence? I mean, influence others to steer away from violence. And, you look at how far we've come since then. I mean, where was your faith? You said you were raised in a Christian family, but that's a pretty traumatic event to watch and to then go to a high school. So, how did that shape not just your calling, but your faith as a teenager?
The thing that was really interesting about it was that I think at that point, I had grown up in a Christian home. I had the head knowledge that a lot of young Christians have. I
Yes.
knew what I should believe. I knew what the Bible said. I knew what I had heard. But I'll be fully honest with you, it wasn't until I hit my 30s, really. And I would say it started in my 20s, but where I really got that it wasn't all about me. I mean, I would
Hmm.
say 3 years ago, 4 years ago, even, I really hit a place where I realized that, all of this striving for success in media and trying to get my name out there, I was making it about myself, and it was really about God. And we could talk more about that. But to kind of answer your question at that point, I had that head knowledge. But the thing that kind of rocked my world about Columbine was that as I was going out and speaking and talking about it, I started to befriend some of the survivors of Columbine. And we actually had speaking tours going. We were working together, and I was helping get them out to schools and to speak at schools. And I was shocked by their ability, even as teenagers at such a young age. And by the way, we're still good friends. Some of my closest friends are from that time. They had such a level of forgiveness, even though they had gone through
Wow.
this horrible thing. And that for me was the first time that I really saw that kind of Christian forgiveness, right? That you had gone through something unthinkable. maybe you had a sister who had died, who had been killed in it. Maybe you watched your friends die, and you were able to find forgiveness for the people who had done that. And by the way, people who were not around anymore, they had taken their own lives. And so you didn't get that sort of peace that you would want, and yet you could still forgive. So that for me at the time was a really powerful thing.
That is powerful. That's really powerful to see that as such a young man. And then, so you've been doing very active media. You have had a lot of success. You've written for, Fox News and TheBlaze and everybody in between. So let's talk about what you've seen so quick. And I don't want to talk about your book yet because I want to end with that. But you've seen so many cultural changes, and it's really created a lot of confusion for people, faith people especially, because we don't know what to think. We don't know where to look for information that's real information. And as a journalist, how do we better equip one another for the times that we're in now?
Yeah, I think it's so important as Christians that we don't fall for things that aren't true, because, we follow truth. We believe truth, and we're called, I think, in every other aspect of life. And it's really tough. I'm making it sound easier than it is, but we're called to find the truth and to understand it. And I think a lot of us, we get swept up into, and I know I've been guilty of this, into the emotions of the politics or the news or whatever it is that we feel very strongly about. We can get swept into that. And that can sometimes, it's okay to have opinions. It's okay to speak out. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but we can sometimes get swept into things that aren't true or embrace things that aren't true because they fit sort of our narrative or what we believe. But yet we really are called to pause. And so my thing is, when I get information or I hear something, I pause. I think, is this possible? And usually, because this culture is so crazy and so much is going on, it's usually very possible, all of it. But is it true? And that might require us, looking at 4 or 5 different sources that we can trust. And by the way, that's a big thing. Just as a journalist, the way that I was trained, and as a Christian, I want to know that I'm not just on some random website, but that I'm somewhere I can know that maybe it's not the full story, but it's at least accurate, the pieces that I'm being given. So there's a lot there, but I think we are called as Christians to lead the way in truth in every aspect of our lives and every aspect of information. And so we've got to strive towards that, I think.
Well, I agree with that. But, we've got a world that's permeated with fear, and we're called to be faithful and we're called to be light. How do we take real fear, real situations that are happening, and come out of that and encourage our brothers and our sisters, and, be that, remind people of our faith person? Because, we get caught up in the emotions just like everybody else. But God calls us to step back, like you said, and take a moment. And, I think sometimes we're too informed by too many opinions that, if it's on the internet, it must be true, right?
Yeah, that's like, and we all, and especially when it's something that backs your, like if I see something that this is my worldview and I'm seeing it, I'm much more likely to be like, oh, can you believe that this happened?
Yeah.
But we want to make sure that that's true. I think, to answer your question, it's so important. And this is something that I've had to challenge myself on, that I continue to have to, because I like to say a lot of things, right? Here we are, we're talking, and I know that you like to communicate. We can say a lot of things, but are we doing things that show what we believe? And when it comes to fear, and there's so much fear. There's so much happening, not only in our nation, but around the world right now. And are we taking actions in our lives? Because let me tell you, people are watching, non-believers are watching how we behave, how we live. And I'm guilty of not always living up to this, but making sure that our actions reflect that we show that even if we're saying we're not fearful, that we're actually showing that. And also that we're showing the love of Christ. We can truth people to death, or we can love them to death, but you need to have both. There is no, you can't walk around saying, I love everybody and I'm not going to give them the truth because I love them so much. Well, that's not love. And so it really is about finding that balance between truth and love, and how we live and how we behave and how we act towards others and in our own lives. And I know that seems kind of general, but I think that is sort of a starting point for a lot of us, because we might recognize that maybe we're not living in a way that reflects what the gospel tells us.
Well, true. And I think that's so well said. We all have been created for a purpose, and God didn't forget what was going to be going on when he put us in this world. And I think when the world is going great, we don't really struggle with what our purpose is. But when it's scary to step out on a limb, we start to really think, well, maybe I'll just wait this trial out, or maybe I'll just wait till this big mess passes over, or I'll wait till the election. We can't wait. So what do you say to someone who says, man, I really have no clue what my purpose is? I'm just kind of sitting back and watching and hoping somebody comes in and saves the day.
Yeah, I think it's so important to wake up every day. And again, this
Yeah.
is something I have not always lived up to, but it's something that I really try to do now. And to say, God, where do you want me today? What do
Mhm.
you want me to do? Who do you want me to communicate with? How do you
Yeah.
want me to behave? What do you want me to say? I mean, that's a lot of
Yeah.
questions, right?
Yeah.
But when
Mhm.
we start our day with those questions, and we start every day with that, that's a starting point. But also asking God for that purpose. What is it you'll have me do? And
Mhm.
sometimes I think a lot of us, we're just kind of running around. I know I've done this a lot in my life, in my career. I just do things that I think I should do.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh yeah, God's got this for me. But sometimes I'm the one driving it. And I think we all fall into that trap. And so
Yeah.
making sure that we've paused, taken that back seat and said, God, what do you want me to do? And of course, we have to then act on that. But part of that relationship, I think, is understanding purpose through prayer, scripture, relation with God, right? That's how we
Mhm.
do it. And for
Mhm.
me, I will tell you, this past year, I know it's been so hard for so many people. And I, for the first time, took that back seat where I said, okay, God, I'm going to stop trying to drive this car, and
Yeah.
push it forward on my own. I'm going to let you show me where you want me to be, who you want me to talk to, what you want me to say, how you want me to behave. And I will tell you, it's been the most rewarding professional year of my life. It's just interesting when you kind of let him do it, what changes. And so that translates though as well into how we interact in a crazy culture.
Yeah.
What are we supposed to not be saying? What are we
Yeah.
supposed to not be typing? And I think it's essential we think about that as well, because a lot of us are very reactive when we need to be more pensive and thoughtful
Yes.
before we react.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree with that more. And what you just basically said is we simplify, and all of those relationships, we're bombarded with information every day. But if we seek God first, and we seek him first, he says he'll make it known to us what his plan for us is, and he will provide for us. But we don't seek him. I mean, he's one of the little voices in all the people we hear from all day, every day. But asking him is just so simple, but it's so profound.
It is, because we don't do it, because the people we see in front of us, our friends, our family, our loved ones, not that they don't have good advice, but it's easier to listen to them. And here's the thing, and this is where the real challenge is. We are being bombarded by messages,
Mhm.
Hollywood,
Yeah.
media. When
Mhm.
you consider how often we are at church or watching church or interacting with gospel content
Right.
versus how much other content is coming at us. I know it's different for everyone. Some people do a better
Mhm.
job of balancing. I would bet the reality is it's a 90-10, 80-20 split. And the bigger proportion is really the world, the messaging of the world coming into our lives and our hearts and our minds. And if we're not preparing ourselves for that and
Yeah.
having a solid footing, then it's very hard to sort of hold on to where we're supposed to be and then to find that path. I mean, the Bible tells us, scripture says, God will make our paths straight. He will lead us where we're supposed to be. But,
Yeah.
you end up in a weird detour when you haven't quite taken the steps you need to make sure you can sift through that information and find truth.
True, and we're called human beings, not human doing. So it's more about who we're being. And as a husband and as a father, it's the same thing. If you were to spend 90% of your time away from your home environment, you wouldn't have very good relationships. And that's the same with our Lord.
Exactly. No, that's such a great point. That's such a great point. And I think for me, that struggle, and I'm always open about this, is finding the balance between work and family and making sure that when that's out of whack, and I'm trying to not let it get out of whack, but when it is, that, I'm communicating with my family about that and they're letting me know that, because it's very easy. And it's not just
Yeah.
work. I mean, hobbies, all sorts of things people struggle with, making sure those things come after the things that are most important, and that we're not overdoing certain elements of our lives and really hurting not only our relationship with God, but our
Yeah.
relationships with other people.
It's so, so true. So you've written 4 books. and you just came out with one. I don't know how long it's been, but it's called Playing with Fire. And wow, is it timely? Because I mean, we're dealing with a lot of evil in our world, and people don't understand. And you're an investigative journalist, so you've got the facts behind. You don't just put touchy feely stuff out there. You've got the facts. You've done the investigation. I mean, you're real journalism, and your books come from those perspectives. So let's talk about what people will understand and why you wrote this book.
Yeah, the thing that I usually that raises some eyebrows, the book's called Playing with Fire, as you said, and then the subtitle is A Modern Investigation into Demons, Exorcism, and Ghosts. And so people will hear that and their eyebrows raise a little because they're not sure what to make of it. And the entire intent of this project was for me to follow what I felt called to do, which was to write about a subject that I didn't really want to write about. It's something I've covered a lot in my work. I will tell you, this is a book that I tried to avoid writing. The first time it came, I prayed about it. It didn't feel right. I said no. The second time the opportunity came, it was much clearer that God had dropped this opportunity in my lap to talk about this very difficult subject. And the thing that struck me, before I talk a little bit more about the intent, was that I had this fear about writing this book. And I bring that up because I think a lot of people, when they hear demons, exorcism, ghosts, they're intrigued, but people are also very fearful.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're Christians, these are not subjects, when we're living the right way, that should scare us. And so for me, when the opportunity came and I sat on the book contract for 2 months because I didn't want to do it, and I had to really pray through that, I recognized that I had a fear of something I wasn't quite understanding. And as a journalist, I find that really interesting. As a Christian, obviously, I find this topic essential to talk about. And here's why. I think that a lot of us in the church, and this goes for people outside of the church, obviously evil is real. Whether an atheist believes it's happening or not, we know as believers this is happening and it's impacting society, culture, and our individual lives. So my goal was to show hope, not to scare people, not to take all of these stories and all of this evidence and to freak people out and then leave them there, but to show people, here is what is going on.
Mm-hmm.
Here are the stories of healing and possession and all of that. And here's the hope. And I just want to add one other thing to that, because I think Ephesians 6 is one of the most overlooked chapters in Scripture. We all read it, we all look at it, and we get to it, and it says, take up the shield of faith. There's a battle between good and evil, and we sort of move on. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, though, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, wait a minute, Ephesians 6 is telling me that there is a battle between good and evil, and that we are not in a battle over flesh and blood. And here's our entire culture, our entire world locked in a battle right now. We just went through one of the worst presidential elections we could have ever gone through. And we're all mad at each other. The world's telling us to tear each other apart, cancel each other. And Scripture's telling us something totally different. The real battle is one that we're not seeing with our eyes, but that is happening. Exactly. And that's so essential. So anyway, that's a lot, but I will say I wanted to drive that home and help people understand that.
Well, why do you think people don't understand that? See, we're not taught about these things. I mean, I'm in a church that does. We're taught battle plans and strategies and things, to be aware of. We have an enemy prowling to, bring division, bring hatred, bring confusion, and he's doing that. So why don't we talk about it more so that we can educate people more?
What you just said is so profound and so true. And I think so one of the things I discovered, and I knew this going into Playing with Fire, but there are two dynamics, and these are the extreme dynamics. One is there's a demon under every rock. Every single thing that happens to you is demonic, whether it's sick, whether you coughed, whatever. Okay, I'm over enunciating that, but that's one camp. The other camp is, let's pretend this is not going on and not speak about it at all.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is that you have Hollywood. They're not doing it theologically correct. They're not doing it in the right way, but they're talking about a church topic more than the churches.
Yes.
They are putting out movies about the demonic every year. They're taking some true stories or allegedly true stories, and they're weaving them into these narratives. It is remarkable to watch the secular world again, not doing it theologically correct, take a topic and talk about it more than many churches are. And so one of the things we did, and we can unpack that more, but in Playing with Fire, is we went through HarperCollins, and I was so blessed that they were willing to do this. We went to about 1,200 church leaders. Now, these are people who are Bible study leaders and not just pastors, but people in different leadership positions in churches. And we asked them a series of questions. Do you believe that demons exist? Overwhelmingly, they said yes. Do you believe Satan can impact culture? They said yes. You go down the line. Can evil impact, individual lives? Yes. Then you get to this question: is your church doing enough to address this issue of evil? And the vast majority say no. So here are the church leaders, almost 8 in 10 of them, saying that their church is not doing enough to help them understand these issues. That's a crisis because of Ephesians 6.
Yeah.
Because of Ephesians 6.
Because we've been given the tools. I mean, Jesus overcame the enemy of death, and we've been given the tools. But if we're not taught to use the tools, we're not taught that we have victory, then we're walking around ultimately in defeat.
Absolutely. And I will tell you, I had people who were very critical of the fact that I was writing this book while I was writing it. People in the church, a few people who said, why would you give Satan attention? You're just giving him attention. And I actually think that the opposite dynamic is happening. I think that Satan is hiding out. I mean, the entire world is reeling. There's chaos going on. And we have a lot of people in the church. And don't get me wrong, there's lots of great churches that are talking about this. But the reality is we have almost 8 in 10 church leaders saying that their church is not addressing it enough. Satan is hiding out. It's as though he's not even there, but Ephesians 6 is still happening. And we have this dynamic going on. And if we don't understand the battlefield, half of us don't even realize we're in a battle. That is a major problem across the board, from individual to cultural issues at large.
Yes, that's so true. Well, so let me ask you this. From a perspective of being in Christian media, I read that last year, 2020, the Bible app was the number one downloaded app in, the year of 2020, which is where the pandemic was. What good things are you seeing? Media is exploding from a Christian perspective. There's a lot of opportunity. What are you seeing that's really good, that's really encouraging from your perspective? You're in charge of content for PureFlix, one of the biggest Christian streaming platforms. I know there's good things happening, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think right now you're seeing what you just mentioned. First of all, the Bible app, Christian content during the pandemic, there was a real quest to find it. There were also some surveys, there was at least one survey showing that for the first time, there was a slight decrease in the nuns. Now, these are not Catholic nuns. These are the people who say they either don't believe, they're either atheist, agnostic, or they don't have a faith. And the third group is the biggest one. But there was a slight decrease. We've been seeing an increase of people saying that they don't believe. And that was really fascinating to see, that maybe there was a turning point. Maybe culture has gone so far that there are some people who are saying, wait a minute, what's going on here? And, we're seeing so many people who are looking for alternative content. They're looking for content that not only backs their worldview, but that they can watch with their kids or with their family, or that they can watch without feeling afterward like they did something wrong. I mean, it's just, there's so many positive things happening. And I think, for me, trying to wrap my head, one of my books was about the end times. So this is the first book I wrote, looking at the end times and looking at evil, and being able to say, we don't know how God's going to work. It's very possible that culture continues down the path it's going. And I think that's probably what will happen, and things will get worse. But at the same time, in the midst of that chaos, we see more and more people coming to Christ still, right? You see this remnant, this group of people who are finding Jesus. And you saw this during the pandemic, hundreds of people showing up on beaches to get baptized, right? In California. So there's so much positive happening. And I think it's important we talk about that, because the cultural negativity that is sweeping people up sometimes supersedes that.
Well, and with the cancel culture, you have people that are firing back. People are becoming more educated. People are digging deeper into facts. People are learning what they agree or disagree with, because you're having to find out for yourself what's real and what's not. So, we believe the way to change the world is one story at a time. And, our show's on PureFlix, and it's, if people use media, you've got your media, but we all have an opportunity to use what we've got. And that is our stories. So you've seen that from an investigative standpoint, the power of a story. We can share our stories. And that's one of the ways to overcome our enemy is by the word of our testimony, right?
Absolutely. And that, for me, the most compelling thing, just to kind of talk a little bit more about how Playing with Fire was put together, going through scripture, looking at Jesus's encounters, each story, you're talking about stories, it's going back. How did Jesus encounter evil? I mean, we've read the stories, but what was really going on? What are the details there? And then looking at stories today. I mean, my favorite thing about working in media over the last, 22 years has been being able to sit down and tell someone's transformational story. I think one of the best evidences, and we talk a lot about the evidence of the gospel, right? And there's so much debate about it. But one of the best pieces of evidence is looking at a story of somebody whose life was completely transformed. They went from being a porn star to a pastor's wife. They went from, that to me, Lee Strobel's story. I mean, we can go down the line. These are the stories that show us the power of encountering Jesus. There's a lot of negative stories about the church, and there's a lot going on, but those stories, I think, give us the proof of life change that show us. And in the case of Playing with Fire, watching people heal after going through unimaginable claims of possession or spiritual warfare, and how we have authority over that. And so there's so much there. People's stories matter. That's always kind of been the tagline in the back of my mind. And so some of the best stories I've ever covered, by the way, are stories about people who are not celebrities. They're not people who you would know their name maybe, but they just have an amazing story.
Yes, and I agree with that. And, the thing about Jesus was, and I think what trips people up so much about their stories is they think they've got to have it all planned out and they've got to have, the book. But Jesus spoke in short stories. And so when we're walking alongside someone, we don't have to share our whole life story. We can just say, hey, I know someone who overcame addiction, or that pornography addiction, or a demonic deliverance. I mean, if you come along someone and say, this is what God did in my life, it doesn't have to be your whole life.
Exactly. Yeah, it can be a little snippet of your story. And I think people too need to not be afraid to share their testimony. There's still that, I think, for some people, that cautiousness, because there's still some shame sometimes. And knowing that, we're forgiven, that when we seek Jesus, we don't need to have that shame that holds us back. If you have a story that's going to help somebody, share it. And I will tell you, some of the stories that I was encountering and telling in this latest book were really hard for people to tell. I had a lot of people who didn't want to share, and they were strong Christians. They felt compelled not to. And you have to follow going back to the beginning of this conversation, what God tells you to do when it comes to your story. But if you're holding back for the wrong reasons, I'd encourage people not to, because people need to hear your story. There's people out there who need it.
And secret equals shame. And, I'm the first to say, I wrote my book and I put the good, bad, and the ugly in there. And it feels great to not have any secrets. I'm not hiding behind anything. So there's something very freeing about being able to use my life, the good parts, the bad parts, to walk alongside somebody. And it really helps me with people when they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea you went through all that. I'm like, God brought me through. It's not about what you went through, it's about what you come to. And that's what you're trying to do with others with your story. So
absolutely. That is so important. That is so huge. And I think we underestimate the power of our stories. I really do.
Yes. Well, we could talk all day, but we won't. So this has just been great. And I just want to tell everybody to go get the book, Playing with Fire. I mean, we've got your link to your website in the post that we did, but this is a very big topic, and you're coming from stories of people that have actually been delivered. I mean, these are real stories. This isn't, I think this would be a great place for people to begin to understand the enemy that we're up against, but the enemy that we're already victorious over.
Yeah. And it's so important to understand that. And I just listen, my publisher probably wouldn't want me to say this, but if you get a copy, pass it on to someone else. I want people to read it. That's why I wrote the book. I don't care about any of the other stuff outside of, this is something we need to be talking about as a church. We need to understand it.
It is. It's so important. And I'm so glad you wrote it, and I can't wait to read it myself. So,
Well, thank you for having me today. I really appreciate it.
well, thank you so much. It's been great to have you. I've seen you for a long time, and I'm glad we were finally able to connect. And we're both at PureFlix in one way or another. So thankful for that platform as well. So you keep doing what you're doing, and we'll come back around and do this again.
I love it. Thanks so much.
Okay, Billy, have a great day.